The town of Belridge wore the evening like a pressed tuxedo, neat, polished, expectant. Strings of white lights framed the iron gates of the university, glowing like constellations brought to earth. Kaylin Drummond sat quietly in the back seat of the car as it pulled up to the familiar limestone facade of Belridge Hall. The same ivy curled up the columns. The same crest-book quill laurel was engraved above the grand doors. But everything felt different now. Or perhaps it was her that had changed. The valet opened her door with a professional nod, eyes flicking briefly to the invitation in her hand. It was simple, unadorned, addressed only to Miss Dicey Wren. Her legal name was still Drummond, of course, but no one in this crowd needed to know that. Not yet. She stepped onto the flagstone walkway and adjusted her coat. The air was crisp. March in New England always was. Inside the university's centennial gala was in full swing. A string quartet played something elegant and old money. Laughter echoed from the rotunda, mingling with the clink of champagne flutes and the hush of expensive shoes on marble. The event was held in Drummond Auditorium, a name etched across the grand wooden arch above the ballroom entrance. Named, of course, after her grandfather, Archibald Drummond, the man who had once declared at a board meeting that education must serve legacy before it serves the masses. She hadn't walked into this hall in nearly a decade. The last time she had been here, she was 23 and standing in the back watching her brother Thayer receive a faculty award while their parents beamed like royalty. That night she had clapped with the others, unseen and unwanted. Tonight, she entered through the front. A tall man in a dark blazer brushed past her and paused. He turned, brow furrowed. "I'm sorry," he said, voice cautious. "You look familiar. Did you attend Belridge?" Kaylin smiled politely. "No. I took another path." The man lingered, clearly trying to place her. She turned before he could say more and walked into the room. The ballroom was dazzling. Hundreds of guests in floor-length gowns and tailored suits mingled beneath the chandeliers. The floral arrangements were white orchids and navy hydrangeas Drummond colors. On the stage, a slideshow looped through a century of photos, deans, donors, groundbreakings. Her grandfather's image appeared often. So did her father's, her mother's once, Thayer's twice. Her own name was nowhere. To the left of the bar, a large display titled Foundations of a Legacy showcased archival images and handwritten letters from the first family of Belridge, the Drummonds. She walked past the glass case slowly. There was a photo of Archibald and Silas at a ribbon cutting, a scanned copy of a $4 million donation check, a page from a Belridge yearbook listing notable alumni. Beneath it all, etched into brass Drummond family legacy, Archibald Silas Vera Thayer, not Kaylin. Her gaze stayed on the plaque a beat too long. A server walked by with a tray of flutes. She took one not because she wanted champagne, but to keep her hands from shaking. She had expected this, planned for it. But some wounds never scabbed, they just quieted beneath the surface. She moved through the crowd, staying near the edges. No one recognized her. Or if they did, they weren't certain enough to say anything. Her face had changed. 9 years will do that. Her hair, once a long, unruly mess, now fell in sleek auburn waves. Her posture, once slightly slouched from years of being overlooked, was straighter now, more sure. The dress she wore was simple but impossibly well cut, and her heels made no noise on the tile. Somewhere across the room, her mother's laugh rang out. Kaylin turned just slightly to spot Vera Drummond holding court beneath a chandelier wrapped in navy silk. Her makeup was flawless, her expression tight with practiced warmth. To her right stood Silas, as imposing as ever, his salt and pepper hair styled immaculately, hands clasped in front of him like a former senator, waiting for applause. Beside him stood Thayer, still handsome, still smug. The familiar tilt of his chin made her stomach twist. He was laughing at something a dean had said, nodding like a man who had never once been challenged. She looked away before any of them could scan the crowd and see her. In the far corner, a string quartet played a subtle transition as the MC stepped up to the microphone. "Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Centennial Gala. Tonight we celebrate 100 years of excellence, innovation, and tradition at Belridge University. We are especially grateful to the members of the Drummond family for their continued generosity and vision. Applause broke out. Kaylin clapped expression unreadable. Later tonight, the MC continued, we'll hear from a very special guest, someone whose quiet partnership has shaped our most ambitious transformation to date. But first, a short video presentation. The lights dimmed, a spotlight hit the projection screen. Images flickered, a new student center, upgraded labs, classrooms filled with modern tech. Text appeared powered by OpenPath, a vision partner in equity and access. No one in the crowd noticed the sharp intake of breath Kaylin made. No one knew that every student, every updated system on that screen had come from the software she and her co-founder built from scratch in a basement apartment 6 years ago. They didn't know that without her donation channeled anonymously through a holding trust, this very university would have had to cut entire departments last year. They would. Soon, as the lights rose again, murmurs floated through the room. OpenPath, someone said. That's the company helping public colleges, right? Another voice. I heard they started in Appalachia. Odd fit for Belridge. Kaylin turned toward the bar. She needed a moment. As she reached for a glass of water, the bartender gave her a quick nod. New face, he said. Board member's guest, something like that. She replied, smiling softly. As she turned back toward the room, her reflection caught in a tall mirror behind the bar. It startled her not because of how she looked, but because of who she looked like. For a split second, she saw her mother's chin, her father's stare, her brother's posture. Except now it all belonged to her. She was Kaylin Drummond. Once erased, now returned. They didn't know it yet. But tonight in the hall that bore her family's name, she was the one holding the legacy, and she wasn't giving it back. Kaylin had been raised not in a family, but in a dynasty. From the moment she could read, she knew what was expected of her. There were rules, though, that they were never spoken outright. They were stitched into the fabric of dinner conversations, embedded in glances exchanged over boardroom lunches, carved into the walls of the Drummond estate like the family crest above the fireplace. Legacy, excellence, appearance, control. The Drummond house in Beacon Hill was less a home than a curated museum of influence. Every room held a portrait of someone important. Judges, professors, donors, founders. Her father, Silas Drummond, had taken over as chairman of the board at Belridge University by the time Kaylin was 10. He treated the role like a blood right. On Sundays, he would read financial reports in his leather chair while correcting her vocabulary mid-sentence. Her mother, Vera, didn't sit still long enough to correct anything. She was the art world's version of a socialite organizing benefit auctions, gallery retrospectives, and gala dinners for causes that always seemed to circle back to people who looked like them. Then there was Thayer. Brilliant, polished, obedient. At 29, he became Belridge's youngest tenured professor specializing in constitutional law. He was the favored child, not just because he followed the blueprint, but because he did so with flourish. He knew how to speak the language of legacy with native fluency. When they walked into any academic room together, Kaylin became his shadow, even at 16. From an early age, she understood that she was not the blueprint. She didn't mind it at first. While Thayer debated with their father over federalism, she slipped away to help the kitchen staff clean up. She learned more about human dignity from the housekeeper, Miss Inez, than she ever did from the mission statements of the Drummond Foundation. Miss Inez had been the first to notice that Kaylin volunteered at the local youth center on weekends. Your people talk legacy, she once said gently while folding linen napkins. But you move like someone building something new. By 17, Kaylin knew what she wanted to study: social work. She wanted to help kids who had never heard of SAT prep, whose lives weren't already paved. Belridge didn't offer that. Neither did her family. So, in the quiet hours after midnight, she applied to Columbia's School of Social Work without telling anyone. She wrote her admissions essay sitting cross-legged on the floor of her closet with a flashlight and a trembling heart. The title of her essay, Unwritten Maps. Her acceptance letter arrived 3 weeks before her high school graduation. It came in a thick envelope full of possibility. She held it in her hands for 10 minutes before opening it. When she read the word congratulations, Something in her chest cracked open like a window pushed up in spring after too many winters. She didn't tell her parents right away. There never seemed to be a right moment, until, of course, they took the choice away. The annual Drummond Foundation spring dinner was always a grand affair held in the high atrium of the university's donor hall under the stained glass dome donated by her grandfather. That year, Kaylin was told she'd be seated at the family table near the stage, a subtle nod she assumed to her upcoming graduation. The night began like all the others. Vera floated from table to table in a sculpted navy gown, air-kissing trustees and curators. Silas stood with one hand on Thayer's shoulder as they posed for photos with department chairs. Kaylin wore a dress chosen by her mother's stylist and said little. She smiled, nodded, and waited for the night to end. Then the lights dimmed. The MC stepped onto the stage and cleared his throat. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we're pleased to announce a very special honor for one of our own, a future Drummond Scholar. Please join me in congratulating Miss Kaylin Drummond, who has been selected to receive the Bell Ridge University Founders Grant, a full scholarship, to join the political history cohort this fall. Applause erupted. Kaylin froze. The spotlight found her. Someone gently touched her arm and gestured for her to stand. She did, but not because she wanted to. The applause quieted as she approached the podium. Her father's smile was fixed almost glassy. Her mother's hands were clasped in anticipation, proud and posed. Thayer gave a small approving nod from his seat. Kaylin looked down at the row of dean's trustees and guests seated in front of her. Then she looked at the envelope in her hand, handed to her, just before walking up. The university crest glinted under the lights. I want to thank the Drummond Foundation, she began. Her voice wavered, but she steadied it. And I want to thank Bell Ridge University for this generous offer. Her mother's smile widened. But I have to decline. The room went still. I'm grateful, she continued, truly. But I've accepted admission to Columbia School of Social Work. I want to work in community education, especially with youth from underrepresented backgrounds. That's where I believe I'm meant to be. There were a few polite chuckles, then awkward silence. Kaylin didn't break it. She stepped back from the podium and handed the unopened envelope back to the MC, who blinked like someone had splashed water on his script. From the family table, Vera's face had gone pale. Silas's jaw was tight enough to crack a tooth. Thayer stared at her, unmoving. Kaylin sat back down and folded her napkin slowly. A man at the next table whispered to his wife, not softly enough. Maybe she's having a moment. I'm sure she'll change her mind. But she didn't. That night in the car, her father said nothing. Her mother didn't look at her. Thayer checked his email. Kaylin stared out the window, watching the stained glass dome fade behind them. That was the last time she ever sat at the family table. The following morning, the sun didn't rise. It merely crept like even the day was ashamed to witness what was coming. Kaylin had barely slept. Her body had been still, but her mind had paced the entire night. Every echo from the gala rang through her like a bell tower. The silence in the car ride home, the way her father's mouth had drawn into a thin line, the exact moment Vera lowered her champagne glass as the applause died. By 9 a.m., a housekeeper knocked on her bedroom door. Your father would like to see you. Now, in the study. The words were polite, but her tone held none of the softness Kaylin remembered from childhood. The Drummond study was built to intimidate. Paneled in dark cherry wood, it smelled faintly of cigar ash and old paper. Oil portraits lined the walls, and the rug had been flown in from Morocco, at least according to Vera, who always emphasized provenance. Kaylin stood just outside the threshold for a moment, hand resting on the doorknob, bracing herself. When she stepped in, Silas was already seated behind the desk posture, straight hands folded. Thayer sat to his right, legs crossed, reading something on his tablet. Vera was on the sofa, arms clutched across her chest, her silk robe too pristine for someone who claimed to have been too distraught to dress. Sit, Silas said. His voice was calm, too calm. Kaylin didn't sit. Am I being summoned or sentenced? Don't be melodramatic, Vera said, her voice brittle. We simply need to clarify the consequences of last night's stunt. It wasn't a stunt. Kaylin replied, her tone steady. It was honesty. You made a decision for me without asking. I made one for myself with clarity. Silas tapped a folder in front of him. Let's get to the point. As of this morning, the Belridge Scholarship has been rescinded. We've informed the foundation of your decision to decline the grant. They were confused, but compliant. Thayer didn't look up. Vera looked like she might cry, but not from heartbreak, from humiliation. Silas continued. Furthermore, your place in the family trust is under review. That includes your education fund. Kaylin blinked. Wait, you're cutting off my tuition? We're cutting off your access to resources tied to the Drummond legacy, he clarified. Columbia is not part of that vision. I applied. I got in. You didn't pay for that. I did it myself. Yes, and you're free to continue that trend. If you want to live like one of them, he said almost casually, you can fund your life like one of them. The words sat in the room like acid. Vera finally broke. Silas, she's still our daughter. She humiliated us, Vera. I stood up for what I believed in. Kaylin snapped. I didn't burn the house down. No, but you undermined our name. Publicly. Silas's voice tightened. You looked out at trustees and donors and told them you rejected everything we stand for. Thayer finally glanced up, sighing. You could have just talked to them in private. This was theatrical. No. Kaylin said, eyes locked on him. What's theatrical is announcing a scholarship without asking. That was a performance. I just didn't read my assigned lines. The silence afterward was unbearable. Vera stood wrapping her arms around herself. I spent years making sure you were welcomed in every circle, every gala, every luncheon, and you threw it away for what to teach in a broken system to people who'll never appreciate you. Maybe, Kaylin whispered, or maybe because no one else ever held the door open for them. Silas stood. We're done here. You'll have until the end of the week to remove your things. You'll receive no further funding. And I've instructed the family historian to remove your name from the printed Drummond lineage in the Foundation's Centennial Archive. Vera gasped. That's too far. You can't erase me from your lives just because I didn't enroll at your university? Kaylin said, her voice sharp. Silas looked at her expression, unreadable. This isn't about a school. It's about loyalty, alignment. You've made your path. We're acknowledging it. Officially. Thayer looked down again. It's not personal, Kaylin. It's structural. Kaylin laughed once. A bitter, short sound. Of course it is. She turned to leave heart pounding in her ears. Just as she reached the doorway, Vera's voice called after her, quieter this time. If you ever regret this, you know where we are. Kaylin didn't turn around. She didn't answer. She was too busy trying not to sob. Upstairs, she packed in silence. 2 boxes, some clothes, her laptop, a few notebooks, the framed photo of her and Miss Inez from when they repainted the old community center together. Her mother's heels clicked once outside her door, then faded. No goodbye. No warmth. Not even guilt. Her brother didn't appear at all. By late afternoon, a rideshare car pulled up to the curb. The driver didn't ask questions as she loaded the boxes into the trunk. She gave the house one last look, not for nostalgia, but for closure. The front windows reflected the golden light of a spring sun. Everything appeared untouched, unmoved, as if her erasure was already complete. The car pulled away and the gate shut behind her with a heavy mechanical groan. She didn't know where she was going exactly, only that it wouldn't be back. And for the first time in her life, Kaylin Drummond was no longer anyone's legacy. She was simply herself. Kaylin never made it to Columbia. Not that year. The tuition invoices came bright and full of promise. But after she explained her sudden loss of family support, the university suggested she reapply when circumstances were more stable. They were gracious, even sympathetic, but her name still dropped from the enrollment roster 3 weeks before classes began. She didn't cry when she read the deferral letter. By then, her emotions had settled into something colder, something closer to resolve. Instead of Ivy League dorm rooms and Manhattan lectures, Kaylin found herself standing in line at a local community college office in Dorchester, filling out forms under harsh fluorescent lights. She enrolled in night classes, education policy, child psychology, nonprofit management. The credits were transferable, she told herself. It wasn't the plan, but it was a path. During the day, she pieced together a living. Mornings at a small cafe near the train station, she learned to work the espresso machine with speed and grace. Midday shifts as a receptionist at a public library where she shelved books and helped elderly patrons navigate the printer queue. Evenings tutoring ESL students in a church basement, kids who had crossed oceans and deserts just to sit in a cold folding chair and conjugate verbs. She lived in a studio the size of her childhood closet. Her landlord was a retired machinist named Benny who never raised the rent but also never fixed the heater. In winter, she learned to study wearing gloves. She owned 2 pairs of jeans and a single coat she got from a donation bin. Pride faded fast in the face of hunger and overdue rent, but her ambition stayed intact. One rainy Thursday night, after tutoring her final ESL group of the week, she lingered in the hallway scribbling notes for a new worksheet idea on the back of a grocery receipt. That's when she heard a low voice behind her. "You know those kids are going to pass you in vocabulary soon, right?" She turned to find a man leaning casually against the doorframe. Mid-30s, maybe a bit rough around the edges with warm brown eyes and a smile that said he enjoyed pushing buttons. "I'm Torin," he said, straightening. "I teach the GED prep class next door. You're the Columbia girl, right?" Kaylin blinked. "How did you word travels in basements?" He grinned. "I'm also the guy who restocks the coffee and fixes the jammed copy machine. Legend status around here." She laughed, despite herself. There was something disarming about him, not just his ease, but his authenticity. Over the next few weeks, they began swapping stories during breaks. Torin had dropped out of high school at 16, spent his 20s working odd jobs and reading used textbooks. Eventually got his GED, then an associate's degree, then a job running literacy programs for adults. "I was every system's afterthought," he once said. "Now I get to teach the ones no one bets on." It was in those conversations between vending machine coffee and flickering hallway lights that an idea began to take shape. They were both frustrated not just with broken institutions, but with how inaccessible learning still was for so many. The kids Kaylin tutored juggled job siblings and language barriers. Torin's adult students shared one Chromebook between 4 people. Traditional school models didn't fit their lives, and no one seemed interested in changing that. "We don't need to build a school," Torin said one night. "We need to build a doorway." The phrase stuck. Kaylin began sketching the framework for what would become Open Path on a napkin that same evening. An online learning platform designed for flexibility, free access, and dignity. No usernames like Student 4429, just names. Real names, real goals. She applied for every microgrant community prize and public service competition she could find. Her grant writing skills, honed during years of ghostwriting speeches and foundation blurbs for her mother, finally had purpose. They cobbled together a tiny budget from a youth equity prize and a local community tech grant. A small developer team from a nearby university volunteered in exchange for portfolio credit. A former ESL student offered to help with Spanish translations. The first OpenPath modules launched 6 months later. The early days were scrappy. They operated out of the back room of the church. Wi-Fi constantly spotty bugs in the software, endless. But the learners came. Slowly at first, then more steadily. Immigrant moms with 3 jobs. Veterans trying to finish high school. High schoolers in overcrowded districts looking for extra help. Word of mouth spread. OpenPath was mobile first readable on old smartphones and offered lessons that worked on any schedule. Users could leave audio notes for themselves. Each progress badge unlocked a real-world resource bus voucher scholarship info community mentors. And then came Luis. He was 17, incarcerated in a juvenile facility in western Massachusetts. One of the social workers found OpenPath while searching for alternative curriculum resources. Luis devoured the modules, every one of them. Math, reading comp, critical thinking. He asked for more. 2 months later, he passed his high school equivalency exam. In record time. His handwritten letter arrived folded in thirds, shaky but bold. "I didn't think someone like me could finish anything, but now I know I can. Maybe I'll be more than a number." Thank you for the road. Kaylin read it aloud to Torin in the church basement. Then she read it again. More than a number, Torin repeated, shaking his head. Damn. They posted a photo of the letter redacted for privacy on the OpenPath site. Within days, it was shared across education forums, advocacy circles, and eventually news outlets. It wasn't fame, but it was a flame. By the end of that year, OpenPath had over 10,000 users. They were interviewed on a podcast for education reform. A local paper ran a story from basement to breakthrough 2. Educators build a new path. Kaylin refused to be photographed. She didn't want anyone to connect her to the Drummond name. Not yet. Not ever, maybe. The work consumed her in the best way. It felt like building oxygen. She still lived modestly, still took on side jobs when grants ran dry, but for the first time since she'd walked out of her father's study, she wasn't surviving. She was creating. Every time someone logged in, she thought this is what legacy should have meant. Not a name carved in marble, not a curated biography, but a tool that opens a door. That year, on the anniversary of Luis's letter, she and Torin sat on the church steps passing a paper bag of takeout fries. Still want Columbia? He asked, not unkindly. She thought for a moment, watching headlights blur past. I don't know, she said. I think I wanted it to prove something, but I'm not sure who to anymore. Torin nodded. Maybe you already proved it. Kaylin looked up at the sky, exhaled, and said softly, Maybe I just started. 5 years passed, and OpenPath became something more than an idea stitched together in a church basement. It became a movement subtle but unrelenting, like ivy growing through concrete. From 10,000 users, the platform grew to 400,000, reaching across county states and eventually countries. There was no central office, no glossy ad campaigns, just learners logging in from bus stops, shelters, military bases, halfway houses, farm towns, inner-city libraries. Kaylin built it to be quiet, accessible, unassuming. In that sense, it mirrored her perfectly. She remained anonymous in every press feature. When journalists reached out, she only allowed her first name to be used, Kaylin, co-founder of OpenPath. No last name, no bio. Sometimes she let Torin take the lead in interviews. He was good with people and didn't have a legacy chasing him like a shadow. She preferred being the unseen architect. Even their website bios were minimal. Passionate about education equity, works best at 2 a.m., lives on strong coffee and quiet purpose. When money started showing up, donations, small grants, then larger ones, she insisted it flow through their nonprofit status. People asked her to monetize, to scale, to go big or get bought. Venture capitalists called with charming voices and sharp contracts. They offered funding with strings that looked a lot like control. She refused every time. This was never meant to be a product, she told Torin one night while pacing their shared workspace, which now occupied the second floor of an old schoolhouse. It was a lifeline. And you don't sell those to the highest bidder. Still keeping OpenPath running required more than conviction. It required capital. Grants were great, but unreliable. Public donations came in waves. They needed something steadier. She found it unexpectedly through a name she hadn't heard in years. Professor Meena Patel had been a visiting lecturer during Kaylin's brief time preparing for Columbia. They had only interacted a few times, mostly hallway conversations and scribbled notes on essays. But Meena had remembered her. One late evening, after reading an article on OpenPath's GED program in the Atlantic, she sent an email. Is this your work? I thought I recognized the voice. If so, I'd like to help. Quietly. They met in a bookstore cafe 2 hours before closing. Meena was older now, her hair streaked with silver, her eyes still sharp behind red-rimmed glasses. She didn't ask about the Drummond name, didn't pry. She simply said, You've built something rare. I believe in what it could become. From that point on, Meena became a silent investor, discreet, generous, and profoundly strategic. She helped Kaylin set up a trust. Not for OpenPath directly, but for something parallel, something with longer teeth. Through Meena's legal advisors, Kaylin began purchasing microshares in Belridge University's operating board. Not enough to draw attention, but enough to earn voting rights seat nominations leverage. She created a shell trust, Evergreen Insight. No one knew it was her. The trust quietly absorbed what many saw as legacy donations gone unclaimed. When an older board member passed and her shares were left to the foundation, Evergreen purchased them at full value. When another resigned in protest over curriculum changes, Evergreen stepped in. Within a year, the trust held 6.4% of Belridge's voting power. It wasn't enough to dominate, but it was enough to matter, enough to whisper in the right rooms. Kaylin never said why she was doing it, not even to Torin. When he asked about the trust, she simply said, "Some places won't change unless they're pushed from the inside." She kept tabs on Belridge without letting it consume her. But headlines found her anyway. Thayer Drummond named vice chair of Belridge Faculty Council. Drummond Initiative introduces Constitutional Studies Prize for undergraduates. His photo ran beside nearly every article Confident composed, celebrated. His op-eds were quoted by senators and syndicated nationally. He gave talks on legacy tradition, intellectual stewardship. His tone was always polished. His words landed like polished stones in a glass bowl. Not once did he mention his sister. Kaylin would stare at the articles, tracing the spaces between words. Did he know? Did he wonder? Or had he so thoroughly scrubbed her from memory that she was no longer even a ghost? She never contacted him. She didn't need to. Her work expanded beyond education. OpenPath added a mental health module with text-based support for teens. A new partnership helped formerly incarcerated users apply for workforce training. The team grew to 20 full-time staff plus dozens of volunteer mentors. Their community forums were moderated by alumni students who had once used the platform to finish high school, now helping others do the same. They even had a tagline now, "Learning should meet you where you are." Sometimes she missed her old apartment, the one with the broken heater and the leaky window. Success brought comfort, but also noise, expectations, meetings, politics. Still, she kept her life modest. Same phone, same worn messenger bag. She never posted photos of herself. She used encrypted email. The anonymity was no longer just a preference. It was protection. Protection from the question she still hadn't fully answered. What would she do when Belridge found out one afternoon while organizing OpenPath's year-end donor letters? Torin paused at her desk. "You ever think about going back?" he asked. She looked up. "Back where?" He tilted his head. "To the world that shut you out. Family, Belridge, that kind of thing." She smiled, small and tight. "I never left. Not really." He nodded, said nothing more. That night, Kaylin stayed late in the office, sorting through handwritten letters from learners. One was from a woman in Arizona who used OpenPath while living in a car with her kids. Another from a father in Ohio who had dropped out to care for his ailing parents, now finishing his GED at 48. She pinned a sticky note to the corkboard by her desk. It read, "You can be erased from the records. Doesn't mean you stop writing." And under it, a second note in her own handwriting, "Erase me once. I'll build the pen next time." Belridge University had always projected permanence. Its buildings were granite and ivy-clad, its donors old and loyal, its mission statements untouched since the Reagan administration. To the outside world, it looked like the kind of place that could weather anything. But beneath the veneer, cracks had formed. Enrollment numbers began slipping 3 years ago, first in humanities, then across the board. Younger students burdened with debt and wary of institutional promises were choosing cheaper schools with modern infrastructure. Others bypassed college, entirely opting for vocational tracks and online certifications. Belridge, slow to adapt, kept polishing brochures and pointing to legacy. But prestige didn't keep the lights on, and legacy didn't pay payroll. The board of trustees began to worry quietly, then loudly. Outdated technology was bleeding them dry. Paper-based admin systems, manual grade processing, crumbling Wi-Fi. An internal audit revealed that the university was spending nearly 3 times more per student on administrative operations than its peer institutions. Several department chairs retired early. Younger faculty left for places with better digital tools and less bureaucracy. When the annual donor gala raised only 68% of its projected goal, panic set in. Belridge had never missed a benchmark in its 100-year history. That year, it missed 3. Desperate for solutions but reluctant to admit failure, the board moved behind closed doors. They brought in a consulting firm, Graybridge Advisory Group, known for overhauling legacy institutions with a specialty in transitional alignment. It sounded polite, but inside faculty circles, it translated to someone's coming to clean house. The contract for the consultants was large, too large for Belridge's shrinking budget, but the cost was quietly covered by a single anonymous donor. The board chair announced it one Friday morning in a meeting. We've received a substantial gift from a strategic partner. Unrestricted funds with a preference for operational reinvention. That partner, of course, was Evergreen Insight, Kalen's trust. The condition had been clear in the transfer letter: systemic restructuring focused on access efficiency and platform-based education delivery. The Evergreen Trust didn't dictate vendors, but included strong recommendations for digital tools with proven data across marginalized student populations. Among those tools was OpenPath Institutional, the newly launched arm of her platform tailored for universities. At first, no one connected the dots, but inside the administration, tensions rose. Department heads bristled at the idea of outside hands reshaping their workflows. Professors whispered about threats to academic independence. The Faculty Senate drafted a resolution declaring the proposals misaligned with Belridge's historic model. And leading the public charge against the reforms was none other than Thayer Drummond. He penned a lengthy op-ed in the Belridge Gazette titled, "Preserve the Mind, Not Just the Metrics." In it, he called the proposed restructuring a data-driven insult to the liberal arts mission, and warned that handing over pedagogy to platforms dilutes the human element of higher learning. His words were sharp, articulate, and read like gospel to many in the tenured halls. But they ignored the realities of the failing infrastructure and rising student attrition. They ignored the wait lists for basic services and the calls from first-generation students trying to navigate a system that had never been built for them. The board debated. The Faculty Senate protested. A town hall turned hostile. And then the vote came. The trustees approved the transition by a narrow margin, 7-5. Belridge would adopt the OpenPath institutional system campus-wide over the next 18 months. The rollout would begin with advising financial aid and student learning support. Academic departments could opt in for course support tools voluntarily, but core services would be restructured. An anonymous press release was issued to local outlets. No fanfare. Just a quiet statement about partnering with a leading innovator in education access. The name OpenPath appeared once. Thayer did not take it well. He released a follow-up article this time, hinting at external actors without sufficient understanding of Belridge culture. Privately, he met with fellow faculty to discuss the long-term damage of anonymous influence. But the decision stood. Inside the Evergreen office, Kalen read every word of her brother's pieces. Not with anger, but with a strange mixture of grief and clarity. It didn't surprise her that he opposed the shift. What surprised her was how much of her still wanted him to see the value in what she'd built. But she didn't build OpenPath for him. She built it for the students who didn't know how to ask for help, for the girl juggling classes and a night shift, for the mother finishing school in her car between picking up shifts, for Luis. Still, when the formal invitation arrived on thick ivory cardstock, she hesitated. The Board of Trustees of Belridge University cordially invites you to the Centennial Gala, honoring our vision partners in innovation and access. Her title was printed with elegant restraint: Vision Partner, Evergreen Insight Trust. No name, no bio, just a line of text at the bottom: attendance requested. Kalen sat with the card for an hour before making a decision. "I'll go," she told Mina later that evening while reviewing grant reports over tea. Not to take credit, not to confront, just to stand there, in the room that once pushed me out. Mina studied her face. "And if they don't recognize you," Kalen smiled faintly, "then I'll know for sure I don't need them to." The following week, she RSVP'd. One guest, no dietary restrictions. Torin didn't ask to go. He knew her silence was part of the ritual, that this wasn't about being seen, it was about seeing clearly. She didn't buy a new dress. She didn't plan a speech. She simply marked the date in her calendar and returned to work. The night approached quickly. Final preparations began. Board members polished their toasts. Faculty grumbled, but relented. The campus newsletter featured a special edition 100 Years of Belridge Tradition Meets Tomorrow. In the side column, a brief line noted the attendance of anonymous vision partners who enabled key strategic transitions. Kaylin closed the tab, took a breath, and waited. This time, she wouldn't enter as a daughter. She would enter as the woman holding the key to the future they almost lost. The Centennial Gala shimmered beneath chandeliers that hung like frozen stars. Velvet draped the window's gold-trimmed menus stood upright beside polished silverware, and violins played a Bach sonata just beneath the hum of conversation. Belridge had always known how to impress, but tonight was excess refined. The kind of elegance that masked fear of irrelevance, of being outpaced by the very future they pretended to prepare for. Kaylin stood at the edge of it all, unnoticed. Her emerald gown caught the light as she stepped into the room, but no one turned. No announcements had been made. She was to them just another donor or delegate, faceless among faces that valued lineage over presence. That was fine. She didn't need recognition. Not yet. At the front of the grand ballroom, Thayer Drummond ascended the stage. His tuxedo was tailored to perfection, his smile trained through years of expectation and entitlement. Legacy, he said. Voice carrying through crystal-clear speakers is the torch passed between generations. At Belridge, we preserve, we protect, and we promise. Applause followed, polite, rhythmic, empty. Cameras flashed. Vera and Silas sat near the front, beaming. This was the son who never strayed, the son who never questioned, the son who stayed. Kaylin moved quietly through the crowd. No name tag, no formal greeting, just her presence steady and composed. A few heads turned, eyebrows arching and passing curiosity, but no one asked. That was the nature of places like this. If you didn't offer your credentials, they assumed you had none. And she let them assume. The board chair stepped to the mic next. A trim man in his 70s with a Belridge crest pinned to his lapel. His tone was formal but energized. Tonight he began, "We honor a bold partnership, one that has secured Belridge's digital future at a critical moment. Our systems are evolving, our reach expanding, and our mission renewed." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "It is my honor to introduce the visionary behind Evergreen Insight and the architect behind Open Paths University Integration, our Centennial Vision partner." A murmur swept the ballroom. Phones shifted. Glasses paused mid-air. Kaylin stepped forward. At first, there was confusion. A few people tilted their heads. Then someone gasped. Another dropped a fork. Vera's hand flew to her mouth. Silas stared utterly still, and Thayer's eyes narrowed, shoulders locking as if bracing for impact. Kaylin climbed the steps slowly. She didn't rush. Her gown brushed against the polished wood as she crossed to the mic, her heels clicking softly. She paused before speaking. The room was silent now, the kind of silence that only comes when everyone senses they've miscalculated something vital. "Good evening," she said. Her voice was clear, low, and unflinching. "Some of you know me, some think they don't. My name is Kaylin." Another beat, another silence. 9 years ago, I left this campus with nothing but a rejection. Not just from a program, but from a family, from a name. Tonight, I return. Not for their approval, but to share what I've built beyond their shadow. The air thickened. Open Path is more than a tool. It's a network that reaches children no one expected to reach. Migrant teens, adults without high school diplomas, veterans navigating a world that forgot them. We built this without inherited privilege, without trust funds, without anyone telling us we were enough. She met the eyes of a few in the crowd. Some turned away. "You erased me from your stories," she said quietly. "But the people we serve, they made me real again." Silas looked like he'd been carved out of ice. Vera mouthed something inaudible, her hands now pressed together like a silent prayer. And Thayer stood, abruptly. His expression was unreadable. And then, without a word, he turned and walked out. No excuse, no nod. The crowd parted for him like water. No one followed. Kaylin didn't flinch. She finished her remarks with a short nod to the board chair, then stepped back from the mic. Cameras flashed again this time, not for Thayer Drummond or the old guard, but for the woman they'd tried to forget. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. She simply descended the steps and returned to the crowd. Later, blogs would light up. The founder, with no last name, who just saved Belridge. A clipped video would circulate online, her image, frozen mid-sentence, the subtitle reading, "Sometimes the people you erase come back with a better plan." But in that moment, Kaylin wasn't thinking of posts or virality. She was thinking of a classroom in Queens where she first taught ESL to a grandmother who cried after writing her name in English for the first time. She was thinking of Miss Inez and the prison GED program that nearly got shut down until Open Path stepped in. She was thinking of every student who had whispered, "I didn't think people like me belonged in school." And now they did. Back in the ballroom, the MC attempted to regain the room. The violinists began to play again. Someone at the bar asked, "Was that a Drummond?" A whisper followed, "No, I heard they cut her out years ago." Another voice, "She's the one behind Open Path. That platform's everywhere, but none of it mattered." Kaylin had rewritten the script. She drifted toward the rear exit, pausing just once beneath the great brass Drummond seal etched into the floor. She looked down at it, the name that had once held power over her, the symbol that had once meant exile, and she stepped over it, not around, not with reverence, just a single quiet step forward. She didn't need to burn it. She'd built something better. After the gala, after the polished handshakes, the applause that felt too clean, the half-smiles of people unsure whether to congratulate her or recoil, the room began to empty. Clusters of donors migrated to valet pickup faculty, gathered in cautious clumps, whispering behind champagne flutes, and students lingered near the exit, unsure whether they'd just witnessed a reckoning or a beginning. But Kaylin remained behind the stage. She still held the letter. It had traveled with her through 4 apartments, 3 states, and 2 storage floods. The envelope was soft at the edges now, like something handled too often, but never opened. 9 years ago, in a therapy session in Queens, she'd written it as a homework assignment. Say everything you never got to say, her therapist had instructed. She'd folded it, sealed it, and told herself she'd send it one day, but she never did. It stayed with her, buried under notebooks tucked inside coat linings, once even used as a bookmark for a copy of Audre Lorde's Sister Outsider. She never reread it. She didn't need to. She remembered every word. A Belridge student volunteer approached, now tablet in hand and eyes flicking between schedule slots. "We're about to live stream final remarks," she said, a little breathless. "Would you like to say anything before we close out the evening?" Kaylin looked down at the envelope. "Yes," she said quietly. The auditorium lights dimmed. The buffet had been cleared. The string quartet had stopped tuning, and only the stage remained lit. A wide screen overhead displayed the live stream. The viewer count ticked upward, students watching in dorm lounges, in public libraries, on cracked phones, in parked cars. In the background, the Open Path logo glowed. Kaylin stepped into the spotlight. There was no podium this time, no backdrop or gilded microphone. Just a simple wooden chair, a single spotlight, and the letter in her hand. She didn't introduce herself. Not anymore. "I wrote this a long time ago," she began, voice steady but warm. "But I think tonight it belongs to more than just me." She unfolded the letter. To the people who erased me, she read aloud. Her voice did not tremble. "You called it tough love. You said I'd come back when I was ready to do things the right way. But I didn't come back to apologize. I came back because I survived." A few audience members stilled, a few leaned in. "You taught me legacy was worth more than voice. That image mattered more than compassion. But outside your world, I found something else. I found people no one believed in, and I believed in them until they started believing in themselves. A rustle in the second row. One professor crossed his arms, another lowered her head. You took away the Drummond name. But you didn't take my purpose. You cut off my trust fund. But you didn't cut off my will. You erased me from your records. But you couldn't stop the chapters I wrote after. Someone in the audience coughed. Someone else swallowed audibly. And now, Kaylin continued, Open Path has helped over 1 million learners. In shelters, in prison re-entry centers, in tribal libraries, halfway homes, detention facilities, bus depots, in places you've never seen, and I did it without your endorsement, without your gala, without your name. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It wrapped around the room like a gentle fire, slow, consuming, impossible to ignore. You called me a disgrace. But if this is disgrace, she paused and looked up. Then I welcome it. There was a hush, an airless kind of silence like the moment right before thunder. She set the letter down gently on the chair beside her, and then turned her attention to the screen. To the students watching this, she said, looking into the camera lens, If you were ever told you didn't belong in a room like this, know that it's the room that's wrong. A beat. Stillness. And then the room cracked open. Not with polite applause, but with a roar. The back balcony was the first to rise, students stomping the floor with the heels of their dress shoes. A senior in a navy suit whistled loudly. Someone yelled, Speak it, and a few rows forward, a first-generation scholarship recipient, someone who had messaged OpenPath's support chat at 3 a.m. 3 years ago, begging for help finishing a GED course, stood and clapped until others joined. They didn't rise in order. They rose like a tide. Not the donors, not the faculty, not the trustees, the students. Kaylin didn't move. She simply looked out at them, faces lit by phone screens and candlelight expressions soft with knowing. In the center of the crowd sat Vera Drummond, still in pearls, still in posture, but her hands, once so precise, now clutched together tightly in her lap. Her eyes didn't blink. Her mouth parted just slightly as if to call her daughter's name, but nothing came. To her left, Silas sat stiff back, rigid face, unreadable, but his jaw pulsed. His fingers tapped the armrest once, then stopped. There was no control here, no board vote to reverse what had just happened. And behind them, unnoticed by most, stood Thayer, half-shadowed in the wings. He didn't move, didn't smile, didn't clap, but something behind his eyes cracked. He looked younger for once, smaller, less sure of the suit and the tie and the inherited echo chamber he'd defended. But none of them mattered now, because this wasn't about them. Kaylin didn't bow. She didn't linger. She stepped down from the stage, walked past the chair, past the letter, past the standing crowd. In her path stood a Belridge staff member, clearly unsure whether to usher her back or follow her out. Kaylin just smiled, offered a quiet thank you, and kept walking. Out of the spotlight, down the hall, through the back door where a small car waited to take her to the train station, not a limo, not a driver in gloves, just a woman in a denim jacket who greeted her by name and handed her a bottle of water. In the car, Kaylin rested her head back against the seat. The city lights blurred past. A student on a bike waved when he recognized her through the window. She waved back. At her apartment that night, she didn't scroll the headlines. She didn't check her inbox, though she knew it was probably flooded. She turned her phone on silent, changed into a hoodie, and sat by the window. She thought about that letter. Not the words, but what it had meant to carry it all these years. The weight of unsent truth, the ache of silence, and how sometimes, when the moment finally came, you didn't need to shout to be heard. You just needed to be ready. And Kaylin was. She had always been. The morning after the gala, Kaylin didn't wake up in a 5-star hotel suite or her Boston apartment. She was in a modest Airbnb on the outskirts of Belridge brick walls, no concierge, and a view of the commuter rail tracks. The hum of passing trains felt more familiar than chandeliers ever had. Her heels from the night before sat abandoned near the door, one slightly tilted, as if it had collapsed under the weight of truth. Her phone buzzed just after 7. First a text from an unknown number, Silas and I would like to speak in person. Please let us know where to meet you. Vera. An hour later, a voicemail followed, her father's voice sharp, even softened by age. We understand you may be angry, but we believe the family should have a conversation. Kaylin stared at the screen a moment, then locked it. No reply. No need. She brewed tea in the tiny kitchenette, stirring honey into the mug with the same spoon she used the night before. A single envelope rested on the table, her letter folded neatly placed there by the stagehand after the event. She didn't reread it. She didn't need to. She remembered every word. By noon, the national education news was ablaze. Open Path founder, unmasked at Belridge Gala. Legacy disowned. Legacy reclaimed. From outcast to architect. The Kaylin Drummond story. Her inbox flooded. Journalists, educators, donors. The official OpenPath account had to disable comments for an hour to prevent server overload. Most of the messages blurred together, except one. From Thayer Drummond's subject, I was a coward. I watched the stream twice before writing this. I kept hoping it would hurt less the second time. It didn't. What they did to you was wrong, and I knew it. I knew it and said nothing because it was easier to pretend I didn't have a sister than to challenge them. I'm sorry. Kaylin let the words sit on her screen a while. Then she typed, then speak up next time, not after the applause. She didn't hit send right away. She thought about the years she spent curled up in shared apartments, eating lentils for a week and tutoring ESL in coffee shops where no one knew her name. She thought about the countless Thayers who stayed silent when it counted. Then she pressed send. That night, back in Boston, she walked into OpenPath's main office, a repurposed firehouse near South Station, and called an all-hands meeting. The team, still buzzing from the gala reveal, assumed it would be a celebration. Someone brought cupcakes. Torin was already rearranging chairs into a circle. Instead, Kaylin walked up to the whiteboard at the front and picked up a marker. We've done something powerful, she said, but we're not finished. We've made education free and digital. Now we make it personal. She uncapped the marker and wrote 2 words. Unseen students, children of migrant farm workers, kids in foster care who've switched schools 6 times before they're 13, youth in shelters who've never had Wi-Fi, much less a Chromebook. We're launching a new initiative, one that finds them before they fall through. Torin leaned forward, arms crossed but smiling. You're thinking big again. She nodded. We didn't get here by thinking small. Over the next month, OpenPath's new division, informally dubbed Unseen, rolled out across 5 pilot cities. Mobile tutoring buses, offline downloadable courses, mentor matching for teens aging out of foster care. It wasn't glamorous, no red carpets, just classrooms in church basements, vans filled with solar-powered routers and notebooks handed out on cold mornings in forgotten neighborhoods, but it worked. And that was all Kaylin ever cared about. And then there was the library. The Drummond Memorial Library at Belridge had been funded by her grandfather, its atrium lined with marble columns and oil portraits, the ceilings painted with Latin inscriptions about legacy and order. It was the university's showpiece, a shrine to tradition. Kaylin waited until the press from the gala died down. Then she made her offer through the trust. It went through legal procurement and preservation committees without anyone realizing the donor was her. She paid 10 times its endowment value, the condition the name would change permanently. And so it did. The Drummond Library became the Free Learning Commons. No portrait, no marble, just soft lighting, bean bags in the corners, and a brushed steel inscription by the door, A, space for those told they didn't belong. When Silas saw the announcement, he sent no more texts. Vera sent flowers. They arrived at OpenPath in a plain white box. No card, no explanation. Thayer sent nothing at all. Kaylin stood on the Commons front steps the morning of the reveal. No red ribbon, no speech. Just a few students wandering in and out, some clutching laptops, others sipping coffee. No one recognized her. One girl glanced up, briefly smiled, then went back to her notes. She stood there a long time, breathing in the scent of fresh paint and late autumn leaves. She didn't need the campus to remember her. She didn't need the past to applaud. She saw herself clearly, and that was enough. Back at OpenPath, a new message came in that afternoon. A single line from a high school counselor in rural Arizona. We've got a student undocumented, almost aged out of the system, just discovered your unseen platform. She cried, said it's the first time she felt like someone saw her. Kaylin didn't cry. Not then. But later that night, she sat beside Torin on their fire escape, the city breathing below them, and let the silence stretch long and full. She wasn't building anymore to prove something. She was building because the world was still filled with students who hadn't yet been erased, only ignored. And now someone was watching for them. The morning sun hit the red brick auditorium at Haven State University like a quiet promise. It was commencement day, folding chairs stretched across the lawn, camera crews setting up beneath white tents, and rows of students adjusting cords and gowns with fingers that trembled, half from heat, half from anticipation. Families buzzed like bees around a hive, laughing, snapping photos, wiping away tears they swore they wouldn't shed. Backstage, Kaylin stood before a narrow mirror, adjusting the lapel mic on her pale linen dress. No designer label, no stylists, just clean lines, sensible shoes, and the only jewelry she ever wore, a slim gold band on her left hand. Tehran had offered to come, but she'd told him to stay with the twins, curious, chaotic 4-year-olds who could dismantle a bookshelf in under 10 minutes. They were his audience today, watching on the living room screen popcorn already spilled on the rug. An usher handed her a folded program. At the bottom, her name sat bold and unblinking commencement address. Kaylin Drummond, founder. Open Path Learning Network. She hadn't seen it printed like that in years. The Drummond part, not since Belridge. Not since the night she stepped back into that auditorium and reclaimed something they had tried to erase. This time, though, the name felt less like a label and more like a note in a story she had rewritten herself. A student speaker wrapped up. The crowd applauded. Then, over the loudspeaker, her introduction came. Please welcome today's keynote speaker, Kaylin Drummond. As she stepped into the sunlight, the applause rose, not thunderous, but warm, true, the kind that wrapped around you instead of trying to impress. In the second row, a group of Open Path fellows stood wearing soft blue sashes over their robes, first-generation graduates from the nonprofit's pilot educator program. They didn't wave or cheer, they just nodded. That was enough. Kaylin approached the podium and leaned gently into the mic. Good morning, graduates, she began. I want to start with a quote not from a philosopher or a founder or a fortune cookie, but from my mother. There was a ripple in the crowd, curious, cautious. Years ago, after a very public fracture in our family, she looked at me and said, If you ever regret this, you know where we are. She paused, then smiled softly. I never regretted it. But I also never hated her for saying it, because now I understand she didn't know another way, and I did. Somewhere in the middle rows, a woman clutched her purse tighter. A young man tilted his head, eyebrows drawn together like he'd just been handed the missing piece of a memory he didn't know he needed. I used to believe I had to earn my way back into the Drummond name, she continued. That if I worked hard enough, saved enough students, built enough tools, I'd be allowed home again. Her fingers brushed the edge of the podium. But I didn't need that name. I needed the one I gave myself. One built not on bloodlines, but belief. Not on prestige, but persistence. She told them about those first months after she was cut off, about community college night classes and rewriting grant applications during cafe shifts. She spoke of the old firehouse in Boston that became Open Path's first headquarters draftee, loud, full of secondhand desks and first-time hope. She talked about Torin, how they took turns sleeping under desks, how they figured out together how to convert passion into platform heartbreak, into infrastructure, how their first server crashed because so many kids were trying to log in at once from a shelter in the Bronx. She paused, letting that image settle. We don't build legacy by repeating what came before, she said, voice calm and certain. We build it by breaking the mold that never fit us and leaving room for others to breathe. She shared the story of Nia, one of Open Path's earliest learners. Suspended twice in high school for talking back, Nia had recently accepted a role as assistant principal at the same school. Full circle. Applause rolled across the crowd like a wave of wind through tall grass. Kaylin didn't raise a hand to still it. She let it rise, let them feel it, and then, after a breath, she closed. They erased me, she said. Steady now, but I didn't disappear. I just rewrote the ending. They stood for her. Not because a dean had prompted them, not because it was expected, but because something inside them had been seen and honored. Later that afternoon, Kaylin stood near the catering tent with a paper plate of pulled pork and coleslaw. Several young founders circled around her, their eyes hungry, not for food, but for direction. One woman, no older than 28, tucked a curly strand of hair behind her ear and asked, "Did you really grow up with all that? The paintings, the family name, the pressure?" Kaylin gave a soft laugh. Yes, but legacy isn't inheritance. It's what you leave behind that actually helps someone else rise. The woman nodded. Sometimes I worry I don't have a name that matters. Kaylin looked at her, kind but firm. Then build one that does, and make sure it's yours. That evening, she sat on the porch of a small rental house nestled behind an old pecan orchard. It was the same place she stayed whenever she traveled down to Georgia for open path events. Familiar, humble, quiet. The kids were already asleep back home. Torin had sent a video, one of the twins wearing her old Belridge hoodie, the sleeves dragging comically past his hands as he spun in the kitchen. She smiled. Not wistfully, fully. A single text buzzed in on her phone. From Thayer. Saw the speech. Hope you're well. No signature, no expectation. Just a line. She didn't respond. Not out of anger. She simply didn't need anything from it. She watched a firefly blink across the railing, slow and soft, like a breath, finding its rhythm. Behind her was the name they'd stripped away. Ahead of her were classrooms she'd never enter, filled with students she might never meet, but who now had a shot because she didn't quit when they closed the door. She didn't want an apology dinner. She didn't need to sit again at the mahogany table in Belridge Hall. She had built her own table, and the seats were open.